Dzień dobry Państwu. Pozwólcie, że zacznę naszą wypowiedź złożoną z przede wszystkim odpowiedzi na wszystkie 12 pytań, które znalazły się wśród pytań badawczych projektu. Na wstępie nas przedstawię, później opowiem o tym, jaki jest plan prezentacji, a kolejno wyjaśnię nasze...
Sorry, we're waiting for the Polish interpreters to get on the booth.
Pracuję w Uniwersytecie Ekonomicznym w Poznaniu, nazywam się Agnieszka Ziomek. Biorę udział w projekcie.
Sorry about that. These are the conclusions. My name is Agnieszka Ziomek, and over the last 14 months, I have worked at this project, sending the questions, and here I have brought with me five colleagues who have accompanied me in the project because I invited them to participate in this meeting. My colleagues are from the University of Economy of Poznan, and they belong to the Solidarity Trade Union. To my right, I have Katarzyna. She is the president of the University Trade Union. She is also a member of the Solidarity panel in Wielkopolska. She comes from one of the 17 regions in Poland. To my left, we have Jaroslaw Wojciechowski, who also works in the trade union, and the other colleagues represent 60% of the commission of the Solidarity Trade Union in the University of Economy in Poznan. The presentation that we have prepared is actually going to be presented by three persons in the section on trade union activities. So in the presentation we have prepared, we have included the answers to the questions that were asked in the project. In these slides, you will be able to read the question number and the source of the answers, and I will present now the general data. So we have carried out 2 surveys, and the first one The first survey was carried out in a company, but I have actually blanked out the name. We have used this company, even though it's anonymous, but we have used it because they have used the modality of remote work before the pandemic, so they had more experience. This company is a commercial company from the machinery sector. So we have done the surveys in the whole country so that we could have a wider reach and a wider sample size. And because remote work does not have a long tradition in Poland, differently to other Western European countries. The questionnaire was sent to 500 workers, and there were done in a short period of time. Another source of information for our conclusions was Some surveys I have done with colleagues from my own university who are present here in Seville today, and also I've done it with colleagues from the Warsaw Polytechnic University. So we have also done other activities such as training courses and also surveys.
W zakresie regulacji pracy zdalnej i
And therefore, we've also guided ourselves on the guidelines or the directives about teleworking and smart working. We've studied the literature, especially from Poland, about the subject matter. We have seen that there's more and more material. We've used also the official data from the Statistics Institute of Poland and also from companies of the private industry. I would like to briefly tell you about the demographic parameters of the different groups. And then I will talk about the questions. Out of the 500 questionnaires, 479 were right or correct. We can say that the majority were women, almost 100% more respondents than men, people from the service industry. Half of the surveyed people had also care duties of children at home. More than 499 people, out of them, the majority took 30 or 40 minutes to go and commute to work so that they could work physically. The respondents were mostly men between 25 and 35. We do not have information about the organization of their households, the time dedicated to commuting is more than 30 minutes, and as for the management, the responses were especially outside of the questionnaire. The majority were women. And the areas changed. I'm going to go to the first question. And I'd also like to call your attention to the fact that we wanted to provide material for this research. Actually, I've prepared tables to cross statistics, and in the tests I've been able to carry out, the results have significant statistic significance, and as for the relationship quality between two variables, in this case, it is larger than 0.7 points. The first question refers to the influence of teleworking and on productivity of workers. And from our study, we can see that the majority of people state that yes, telework increases productivity. We've also discovered that women, but also male, to the same extent, state that productivity is better with or higher with teleworking. At the bottom, you can see this information that I've just presented The question is, what effect does remote work have on your productivity? And on this table, I compare the positive or the yes answers and the no answers in different aspects of telework. And we can see that people who feel more stressed when they work remotely, 100% of them almost say that productivity when they work online increases. There's also a considerable percentage of people who say that in spite of the fact that they feel stress, they cannot increase their productivity. Also, people say that they do not finish their online tasks more quickly and that their productivity is actually lower. Finally, also there's some people who state that they work more slowly, but that they believe that their productivity is larger, is higher. So we're talking about the productivity related to declarations of their opinions, therefore. As for what factors positively and negatively impact productivity, well, there's a wide range of factors that may affect positively and negatively productivity. As in other countries, the results of which have already been presented in Poland also, the respondents state that they have good working conditions when they work remotely, that they concentrate better, that they have less noise, that they're very happy because it gives them more autonomy in organizing their own work. It is very important for that. Actually, so much so that they believe that that increases their productivity, while there's a factor which is that 52.6% of the cases so a negative impact, which is the fact that there's less interaction with colleagues as the result, and that generates isolation feeling and loneliness. As for the way we measure productivity, whether teleworking makes it difficult to measure online worker productivity, the managers and the workers answered that yes, there's a wide experience with telework, and also that the measurement of the results has been carried out for a long, long time. Therefore, the measurement, even if they're difficult because workers sometimes don't turn on the cameras during the weekly meetings, but with the phone, managers collect the weekly reports. So it does seem that the solutions that are shown here on the slide are efficient and that it is worthwhile to continue with the weekly meetings and also the calls, the phone calls. Because in this company, workers can work online when they want. They do not have a well-defined final or fixed schedule. They work by tasks, by results. They do not depend on the team. For instance, they can work from 19 to 20, from 7 to 8 p.m., which is actually the working hours during which there's a higher productivity. And this is very important to verify the quality of the work, of the intensity of the work with reports, periodical reports, and with a telephone connection. And now I'd like to talk about the role of trade unions. There's two questions actually related to this subject. The first question is whether physical distance makes it difficult to develop trade unions, and the next one is whether specific agreements are enough to improve the employment situation of online workers. For both parties. And I'm briefly going to introduce the first two questions, and then I'll give the floor to my colleagues. If we talk about the physical distance from the workplace, online work, this is nothing new. We've talked about this. Online, when it was implemented, the contact with workers has changed. Trade unions, but also other people state that the workers say that the level of contact that they had before the pandemic and after the pandemic reduced 7%. Now we have difficulty related to the distance, not only physical, but also psychological. And the communication channels have increased that helped maintain a better communication with the trade unions. People have talked about how to recruit new union members. It is a challenge, but that shouldn't be the case necessarily, although it is very interesting to try and see how we can overcome this barrier. We've heard interesting information about this issue. And actually, my colleague is going to dwell on that. First of all, I'd like to thank Seville University for inviting me to this interesting conference. And I would also like to present some issues related to the trade unions and remote work in Poland. From the regulations that have been enforced, there's two types actually of regulations. Companies have the obligation to introduce regulations through an internal regulation or through an agreement with the unions. In the Financial University of Poznan, we have selected the agreement between unions and the company, and that allowed us to ask for many specific solutions. But from the point of view of my region, Wielkopolska, I know that these agreements have been very different. There's some which are very general in scope, there's others which are more specific than the one for our university. If we take a look at it from the union perspective, if I ask myself what is it that we are still missing in these agreements, in these regulations that we already have in Poland, I believe that we are still missing issues related to assessment, the appraisal of workers remotely. And I confirm what the other speakers from Spanish unions mentioned, that they foresee that there's going to be problems with the professional promotion of these workers in their careers. How are you going to be able to prove your capacities to be promoted to a higher job, a job position? HR departments also think about the organization of the working time and so on when teleworking. In our university, at the beginning, it was really difficult to establish the time of telework. We all believe that distant work is done throughout the 24 hours a day, that we can get emails or get a phone call at any point in time in the day. And as a trade union, we contacted the employer to tell them that workers from the university have well-defined working hours, working schedules, and that is the time during which they may contact them professionally as employers and workers. And this facilitates a better life-work balance. There's also a problem that we observed, which is related to remuneration. This is a problem that for the time being, we have not seen, that those workers who work for 8 hours remotely might wonder whether someone works at home and at the same time they take care of their children or their elderly. What is the percentage of time that they really dedicate to effective work when they're at home? So maybe it might be proposed that physical workers, physically present workers, say that they have the right to have a 15-minute break, and that it is unfair that they only have 15-minute breaks when other people work 8 hours. They make the same amount of money I do, but during these 8 hours, maybe they do not work the same percentage of time. But that's assumptions, as I said, for the time being. The only remarks that have been made by workers are that some workers are allowed to work remotely, some others are not, depending on the department where they are allocated to. As Agnieszka said, in Poland, there's no tradition of telework. And we're beginning with our adventure in this field. As for issues related to trade unions and to what we still need to negotiate and bargain, well, obviously, this includes safety in the work, labor safety, and there's problems here. We all say that there is not so many people missing work. But what does that mean? Do they not get sick? Yes, they do, but they don't ask for the sick leave, and they work from home also when they are sick. And this is not good for the health of the worker. There's no absenteeism, but it's not good for the work-life balance. From the point of view of the working conditions, it is also important to bear in mind the accident rate. If during work there's an accident, for instance, we may document it objectively. There's witnesses, and that proves that the accident happened during the working day. But if an accident happens at home, how can you solve that? How can we judge whether it is related to the occupation or not? Maybe there's other causes for that accident. And to my knowledge, these issues are not regulated in Poland. I don't know about other countries. I guess not. Related also to the working conditions, we have regulations based on which the company can verify which are these conditions. But up to now, I have not seen a single worker where the company has gone on site to see whether the working conditions, beginning with the lighting, for instance, is adequate or not. And the same goes for working equipment, such as computers at home, whether they have good quality screens, monitors. We don't know that. All of these might create problems later with respect to occupational illnesses, because if you're sitting in a non-ergonomic position, you may have a problem of health. As for the development of the unions, of the union task, as the president, and I see it more and more difficult. More and more young people want to work online, remotely, and it is very good. More and more people have disabilities who want to work also remotely, but can they be represented in the future if they do not contact their trade unions now? Will their interests be well represented in front of the company? I have my doubts. Thank you very much. My colleague has mentioned many different topics, but in order to add to it, I would like to comment that agreements, according to the Polish legislation, foresee contacts and agreements with the unions, and very often they're an entry gate for organizations depending on whether they want the workers to work remotely or not. And they're making use of this opportunity to either work or not certain legal rules. For instance, beginning with the equipment of the workstations and also the data safety, and the employers say they're going to give the workers the necessary means, that is to say, the IT equipment. Very often, people cannot work remotely because there's no tools. In general, some workers may telework because the company gives them the means, but others are denied the possibility of teleworking with the excuse of the fact that there is no necessary means to buy the equipment. We've also seen solutions where the employer commits him herself to pay the costs of internet the telephone line, electricity, and so on. And in spite of the fact that the worker does not have to pay for the commuting, but he or she has to pay for this or the expenses. And very often the employer, based on the agreement that they reach, pay for this type of costs. My colleague already mentioned what I wanted to underline, which is that teleworking, in terms of health and safety, prevents to document, for instance, an accident in a way which is well guaranteed, and employees sometimes say where they need to do so. And sometimes they just say that the worker needs to do their work in the office, while in other cases they can do that work at home. And obviously this makes it difficult to verify the eventual home accidents. My colleague also mentioned that we don't know how to control the workplace when they are working from home. Obviously, we need to presume that an accident might happen at home, but it's going to be difficult to prove that, to verify that. Thank you very much. Allow me to go back to the questionnaire, the survey that we've carried out within the framework of the telechain project. Now that we're talking about how to share the costs that the worker incurs in when he or she is teleworking, the company pays for the electricity consumption, for the internet consumption, which is shared. The commuting costs are paid by the worker if necessary. If the worker may, for instance, telework 2 days and the remaining 3 days, he or she has to go to the office. Sometimes it's a hybrid type of work and the worker has to work part of the days in the office. And from this questionnaire, from this survey, we can extract that in this case, the commuting costs are only paid by the worker. The next question refers to the negative impact of telework and the fact that we don't have enough regulation about the digital connection. 1 out of every 3 workers don't know that they have the possibility of sharing the costs. The legislator in Poland has taken into consideration the expenses in the majority of the cases. They hold meetings with the workers, and in the majority of the cases, the employer helps the worker in cases of problems. All of this proves that the legislation allows the worker to request help, and the employer normally is obliged to provide help.
And the next question is digital disconnection and whether the digital disconnection can have a negative impact on remote workers. So, apart from the results of the survey that we have done ourselves in 2022, there has been another survey with remote workers, and it seems that 24% of the workers receive phone calls and emails out of working hours, and only 12% does not answer these, and 43% does answer them. In our survey, this problem affects 50% of the workers. I also wanted to draw your attention on the fact that there are rules, European rules, that regulate when workers can be contacted out of their working hours, and workers are already very much aware of the need to have this digital disconnection. We've seen it in our survey, but since there are no central regulations on that matter, currently workers could appeal by abiding to the jurisprudence and general rule of the working hours. So in 2019, before the pandemic, there was a case of a female worker in a local government office who received 100 emails from her boss. In her spare time, she didn't answer those emails and she was fired. But since there are no central solutions in Poland and there is no regulation nor solutions at the company level on this digital disconnection, each worker individually negotiates these rules for this connection. In one of the trainings we did, we discussed the actions that can be taken by a worker to persuade the employer of him emails or calling him out of the working hours. However, this is not easy because there is no general rule about it, and this is quite an important problem for workers. And even in the job interviews with people, potential candidates normally ask about whether there is digital disconnection, and they ask if it will be respected, if their right to rest will be respected or not. So another point is the impact of the disconnection on work-life balance, and this is one of the main problems that is caused by the extension of the working hours, and which has a negative influence on the quality and quantity of rest workers get. So workers with less resting time, it's normally not only less, but also worse quality. So it affects both quality and quantity. Another section is the questions on gender gap and unequal access to jobs. Recording inequality is only there in 9% of the respondents in my country mentioned that, and 13 workers said that they saw no difference between genders, and most workers and the management, they say the gender doesn't play a role. That it's mostly the workers' skills and not so much the gender. So at the bottom we have had a list of the causes that the employers use, or the reasons they use, the excuses they use to not allow for remote work. They talk about gender gap as a reason why they don't allow for that, and other circumstances. So the gender issues are not a problem in Poland. Respondents did not specify the gender gap is an issue, at least not in the company where we did the survey. Almost half of workers are happy with working from home because it allows them to have a better work-life balance. For example, they can look after their children better or look after other dependent people in their family. In general, work-life balance is improved thanks to working from home, and it is represented here in these bar diagrams, where you see different subgroups assessing their capacity to reach work-life balance. So 17% of respondents were people who lived alone, and here you see that there are many differences, and these people perceive better the limits. Sorry, no, not the limits, but the difference between in-person work and remote work. But regardless of the fact that people would have to look after a child or an elderly person, they find it difficult to differentiate rest time from work time. As for health consequences due to working from home, in our survey, only 6% of the respondents admitted to have remote problems. You can see them, these are the health issues they have. Half of the respondents thought that remote work could cause these problems, health problems. As for motivation, and if you have a look at the graphs at the bottom of the slide, people with higher motivation because they have more autonomy and they don't mind being isolated. Well, these people are younger, between 30 and 40 years of age. So both the real young and the elder and the older, they don't think isolation is a problem, and losing motivation is a problem due to isolation. That's what they think, that it is not a problem. The most sensitive group is the group between 30 and 40 years of age, and women are persons who would like to change jobs and working conditions. The next question is about the digital, or the STEM skills, digital skills, and this problem was not deemed to be important to remote work, but as it is seen on the graph below, most of the respondents have said that there were special needs. And regarding management said that there were training courses available in the company and also the mentoring system that would allow workers to solve any problems they may have related to remote work. The last question is on unequal treatment of access to remote work, and whether people could access or not remote work. And here, the most important point is, or was, the type of contracts or employment contracts. And we are not happy with that answer, actually. More than 1/3 of respondents said that there are differences regarding the type of contract, and the remote workers have their tasks much better defined than in-person workers, which may lead to having employment contracts with a more precise definition of the tasks. In the last few years, in Poland, we need lots of workers. We don't have sufficient workforce. And there are many jobs online. And therefore, there could be more and more differences between in-person work and online work. This is a statistic summary, but we don't seem to have time to read it, so I encourage you all to read it, because these materials will be given to all of you. And I will now talk about the conclusions. In general terms, we think that the productivity of the work depends on the employee's competence, so individual competencies. So the company could improve the productivity through better work monitoring and communication. On the other hand, and based on other types of research I did in 2022, workers are more motivated to work online if they are monitored frequently. So these ways to control productivity are actually effective, and it seems that in the future they will work. So if both parties accept the controls, and it's worth it to do this monitoring, this follow-up, I think it's useful. I think for the time being, the companies cannot be without the KPIs. This is a normal way of monitoring in companies, the KPIs. The next topic is the fact that online workers should have regulated the time they work, and this time should be controlled by access to the system. So imagine when there is unequal access to the system, it is really difficult to differentiate between work time and idle time. So in the idle time or non-working time, when an ambitious worker works more than another, this situation can generate a conflict or tensions. Management acknowledges that remote working can cause these tensions, but for the time being, through dialogue, they try and solve it. Regarding the regulation of working hours, there are conclusions pointing at this type of recommendations should be included in the labor legislation, and this is something that the trade unions could request. Another point is the gender issue, which according to our study, it doesn't seem that in Poland the gender issue doesn't affect access to remote working, and there is no gender gap.
Na to, jak można byłoby pokonać problem rozwoju związków
And finally, there's an answer such as, for instance, how could we overcome the problem we have for the development of the union activity? Well, because of this remote type of work that contribute to these problems, telework is going to be more and more implemented in Poland. Right now, 1 out of every 12 workers do teleworking. It's not maybe as bigger percentage as in Luxembourg, where it's 1 out of 4, or Finland, but most probably this is going to be growing because the youth express openly their preference. And that is why trade unions need to especially know the circumstances of remote work, which might be more specific, so that they can take it into consideration in their agreements and the collective agreements and so on. The example I mentioned was an agreement that we signed in our university on May the 5th of 2023. And in just a few days, the next regulation was published, elaborating on the content of this first regulation. And next year, a new regulation was enacted, introducing new details, such as, for instance, requirements of the workplace or the workstation, such as, for instance, that the chair needs to have armrests and so on. It is a great area for the union. Unions have good communication channels with workers, and there they can obtain a lot of information about this type of solutions. And for that, the unions need to get involved in these projects and also intervene in the different fora representing the workers. Let's imagine that in many cases, companies only have teleworkers. In those companies, it is very rare for a trade union to be active because it is difficult to integrate their interests because of their communication issues. That is why we recommend to participate actively in research projects such as this one, and to act with a lobby to help defend the situation of the workers who are teleworking, which are more and more in numbers. That's the final recommendation. Obviously, I am aware I have not presented all of the details of the study, but all of them you will be able to get from our report. Thank you very much for your attention.